Yeah, I do want to get to that point, too, because I've made several comments on the air about this, where I've said we have taken on Walmart for their low wages and not paying their workers enough so that it ends up that their workers are on Medicaid and on food stamps because they don't have enough to live on. And your argument, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Carrietta, the same situation takes place at Hopkins.
Yeah, absolutely. It was rather startling. We had one of our union employees, talk to me and began crying out, and I'll call her daughter number 2. And I'm like, what's wrong? She said, I've been working here for 9 years. I go to school. I take care of my 3 kids. But I never realized that I was making poverty wages until I was able to see it in print. And it's heart-wrenching because I represent these workers and just talking to them on a daily basis. Some things we just take for granted. You're the mother to everybody. Once you get to know them, they're in your family.
Right,
so,
right.
You get a couple of dollars here, you do this. But then just to sit and listen and talk to these folks. We were at the table and the attorney said, well, we appreciate you having, a few of your members give us their stories. But, we think that we're giving you a fair proposal. The sad part is that you may have only been able to view 3 or 4 of the workers, but it's hundreds, and it shouldn't be the norm at such a prestigious place as Johns Hopkins Hospital. It just should not happen.
So one quick question for you, Carrietta, before I move back to Daniel and Jeff. One of the quotes in the paper from the union was the percentage that these raises would take out of the Hopkins budget.
Yeah, well, when we did it, they told us, we gave them the proposal. They sat in stone shocked and said that the proposal would cost them $12 million. 4-year contract. 4-year contract would cost them $12 million. And they told us that it took their breath away.
Took their breath away.
It took their breath away. Now, mind you, Jeff just said $84 million in 1 year. But a 4-year contract would cost them $12 million. And it took, actual words, it took their breath away.
So we're talking $3 million a year this contract might cost.
That's it.
And
32 cents. 32 cents.
What do you mean 32 cents?
It would cost them 32% of the total payroll cost is what would cost Hopkins for this contract. That's it. 0.32. 0.32.
So before we come back to Jeff and I want to go back and to talk about the salaries and questions of Hopkins and where money could come from. And I think this is really a critical point. I'm glad you researched this. Daniel, you're a single man, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But even a single person living on, what did you say, $12 an hour?
Yes.
So how do you live on $12 an hour? How do you live on $12 an hour?
It is, it's rough. I just in gas going back and forth from Parkville to Hopkins.
Which is where you live, obviously, Parkville.
Yes, mm-hmm. Parkville. I live in Parkville. Just going back and forth 5 days a week is it's rough. It's rough because, everything is going up. I still, I do live at home, but I still do, provide for myself. I still, do the, wash my clothes, buy things for the house, give my mom something. And it's still, I still am in need of, more money because I don't want to have to struggle. I don't want to have to, I just want to make it easier for me and my mom. I'll say that.
Because at a $15 an hour rate, that would be like $31,000 a year, maybe a bit more if it's $15.50 or where that was. But that's approximately that. That would be a huge boost.
An amazing boost.
Because if you thought about 2 hospital workers making $31,000 a year, 2 people making that salary together, let's say they were married or living together, whatever, you're talking about a couple being able to live on $60,000 a year. You can begin to live on that.
Mm-hmm.
Begin to live on that in this country.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not going to make them rich, but they can at least have their head above the water.
Right.
Well, speaking of rich, the CEO of Hopkins Hospital, fine man, I know him. He's been generous to organizations with which I have worked. However, his annual compensation is more than the cost annually of bringing the workers up to a living wage. Larry Page, one of the founders of Google, takes a salary of $1 a year because he wants to make sure that the company has, rich benefit packages and pays their workers reasonably well. And maybe that's an idea for other CEOs around here, because the distinction now between the wage that the Hopkins workers earn and the CEO's salary is 156 to 1. The CEO earns 156 times what the starting wage is. And, there's been an awful lot of talk about income inequality. President Obama recently said, income inequality is the defining issue of our times. But it's time that we put our money where our talk is. We can reduce income inequality, for sure, but we have to start somewhere. And I would say that Hopkins, as the leading hospital in the nation, could start by reducing income inequality and paying this living wage. They can clearly afford it. Their assets in their last 990, their assets were $470 million. That means that's what they have essentially sitting around.
You're talking about, when you say assets, are you talking about real estate? What are you talking about?
Well, yes, we're talking about real estate, but we're also talking about treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities. They have over $25 million in mortgage-backed securities. They could easily take one source of their assets and put them in essentially a locked box and keep that money for nothing but investing in their employees. It wouldn't harm one current employee. It wouldn't reduce the number of employees who, by the way, compensation is over $500,000. They have 13 people on the Hopkins payroll whose compensation is over $500,000 a year. And yet they can't afford to pay more than a non-living wage. They can't afford to bring the salaries beyond the food stamp requirements.
We're going to take a very short break here. And when we come back, we'll get a couple phone calls in and ask our workers and our spokespeople here to stay with us. Carrietta Hiers, who is an organizer for 1199, and Daniel Roberts, who's a member of 1199 and works at Johns Hopkins University, and Jeff Singer will come back with us for the next few minutes and take a couple of calls before we move into our next segment about the future of labor in America. Don't go away. We are continuing our conversation here for the next few minutes with Carrietta Hiers, who is a longtime organizer for 1199, SEIU 1199 organizer at Hopkins. She's in the middle of these contract negotiations. We're also joined here by Daniel Roberts, who is a member of 1199 and a transporter who's been working at Hopkins for a year and a half and is also working his way through college as he's doing it and here at Morgan State University, and has to move in and out of that because wage is what keeps him in school, and he has to work to go to school, and we forget that here in our world. Jeff Singer is here with us, a founder and former executive director of Healthcare for the Homeless, now teaches at the University of Maryland School of Social Work, and is here in this capacity today because he wrote an article after his research on the finances of Hopkins, talking about where the money comes from. You can join us here at 410-319-8888. But there's a couple of pieces we did not really tackle here. Oh, and one little sidebar. I got a text from my wife that I have to read to you all because I'd be remiss if I didn't. And she told me that I made a mistake, which I usually do at least once or twice a show. It's not Manor Tavern. It's the Milton Inn on York Road that used to be where the prep school was that John Wilkes Booth went to. So I have to let me put that out there. Okay, so here we go. So Carrietta, tell me a bit now about. I'm curious about why the strike had. Many people don't understand why the strike had to end after 3 days. It's not that you wanted to end it, but was there a law? What was it that forced the end of the strike?
Well, the bargaining committee is comprised of our members. The members actually voted to have the 3-day strike. And in thinking strategically about actually performing a strike, you have to think these workers, it's an unpaid strike. That's most importantly, it's an unpaid strike. Now, you had a few workers that wanted to do it for a week, but then we have to sit back and think about we're protesting against our members not being able to afford and not having a livable wage. To have them out on the line for a week or longer than 3 days without proper preparation, it's a hardship.
Right.
We don't want to put our members in a hardship, but you actually had folks who were willing to stand. It's on pure principle. They don't appreciate us, and they were willing to take that risk.
So how do you feel about that?
I'm glad they did it, and I'm glad they did it that way because there are a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck. So, I mean, for them to miss $100 to $200 is a big hit. I know myself, I actually tried to go back in and get a little overtime just because I know the next time our pay comes around, I don't want to look back and say, geez, that was a pretty big hit, Like I said before, for me, gas is expensive. So, I have to be able to, get back and forth to Hopkins. So, I'm pretty happy they did it that way.
I think that it's important here, and we're going to bring some other guests in here right now in a minute. Mike Lewis from the Steelworkers Union and Bill Fletcher, who's a union activist, to continue the conversation. Our Hopkins workers are going to stay with us for a bit for that part of this conversation, so we can have this dialogue as it winds its way over the next hour or so. And I think it's important because what I want to raise with them was that at least your union had the heart to walk out. A lot of unions won't stand up and walk out anymore.
Absolutely.
Even if it's a symbolic walking out, saying we're saying this is not acceptable, because you're saying you're going back to negotiations, but you might have to walk out again.
We very well have to. Yeah.
Not that you want to.
You know what? And that's it. We had buttons that says that we don't want to strike, but we will if we have to. This was a hard decision. We had to sit down and really educate our members on this process because we had some folks have never been in the union before, and we haven't had a strike at Hopkins since 2001. Nobody wants to. And our members actually care about these. You heard Daniel. They care about the patients that they care for. They really care about this. But ultimately, family comes first.
Right. So we're going to take a very short break. We're going to come right back, and I want to thank our guests here for being with us, here from Johns Hopkins, from the union, from 1199. It's one of our storied unions. I remember when Bob Moore and others had formed this union here in Baltimore 40 years ago. 40 years ago, as a union, and the work that we all did at that point together with 1199. I have to put that disclaimer out there for a long time ago, and they're still here fighting for the rights of workers, and it's good to have you here. The music you hear on me right now is Loretta Lynn, because she was born on this day in 1935. Speaking of working class roots, we'll be right back. Don't go away.